The forge hadn't been lit in 3 days. Snow gathered in the corners of the windows like old lace, crusted thick where the wind blew hard across the canyon. Inside, the air sat cold and still, heavy with soot and memory. Wade Coulter stood in the darkened doorway, arms folded against the cold, watching the light rise over the snow-covered town like a breath he hadn't taken yet. The bell in the church tower gave a long, low cry, Christmas morning. Somewhere down the street, a fiddle tuned itself into laughter. Voices drifted over the roofs, muffled by snow but bright with hymns and holly. None of it reached Wade. He turned from the door, boots thudding heavy against the boards, and picked up a horseshoe half-formed on the workbench. It was rusted now. Useless. He tossed it into a wooden box marked with scars deeper than any tool he owned. His hands were blackened with old ash, but there was no fire to warm them. He could have gone to the church. Could have sat in the back pew where folks didn't look you in the eye. But there'd be whispered prayers and louder judgments, and the preacher would glance his way when talking about repentance and prodigal men. No, he wouldn't give them that today. He rolled down his sleeves, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. The sky was pewter gray. A stillness hung over the street like something sacred or fragile, not yet broken by wheels or voices. He walked slow, his breath steaming in front of him like a tether to the past. At the corner he paused. Across the street, children in coats too thin were stringing pine branches above the bakery door. A woman stood in the doorway, guiding them with soft hands. Wade watched her as if she were a hymn he'd forgotten the words to. Evie Barnes. She'd been her sister's shadow once, meek, a girl with downcast lashes and the weight of too many rooms to clean. But then the fever came and her sister died and the baby was left with her. Now she ran the bakery alone, quiet and kind. Folks respected her. And she, unlike the rest, didn't turn her face away when Wade passed. Just then the child appeared. A girl of 6 maybe, with a mop of reddish curls and bright eyes that didn't seem to fear anything. She had a woolen shawl knotted crooked across her shoulders and cheeks pink with cold. She saw Wade, didn't look away, and lifted one mittened hand in a wave. Wade's breath caught. He nodded, barely, but she smiled like he'd said something grand. Evie noticed. She stepped forward, resting her hand on the child's shoulder, and gave Wade the briefest of nods. Polite. Careful. He kept walking. The saloon was closed. The post office shuttered. Only the church seemed open to all, its doors wide and warm. Men tipped their hats, women pulled children close, but none crossed the street to greet the blacksmith. Not anymore. Years back, when his wife was alive, things had been different. She was light where he was iron, laughter where he was fire. When the sickness came, it took her in days. The town whispered then, why didn't he get the doctor sooner? Was he drunk again? He wasn't. But by the time he'd run for help, she'd gone cold. Grief had turned to suspicion. Suspicion to silence. He walked toward the livery just to keep moving, boots crunching over fresh snow. The horses snorted as he passed, steam rising from their muzzles. One, a gray with a bad shoe, neighed low. Wade glanced at the hoof. He could fix that. Used to be they'd come to him first. Now they took their horses downriver. Or did it themselves. Or limped. Pride or punishment, either way the anvil didn't sing no more. He ended up behind his shop, near the edge of the woods, where the snow laid thicker and unbroken. A stump served as a bench. He sat there, alone, watching smoke rise from chimneys like prayers he didn't believe in. He took a bottle from his coat. Didn't drink it. Just held it. His fingers wrapped tight, knuckles white. The girl's face came back to him. Those eyes. That wife. The wind changed. He looked up and saw the baker's door open again. Evie stepped out, brushed snow from her shawl, and lifted a basket to hang on a hook outside. It held bread. Fresh. Meant for anyone hungry enough to take it. He stood. Walked back toward town slow. By the time he reached the bakery, the street was nearly empty. The church bells chimed again. Families gathered behind windows lit with candlelight. Someone began singing, "O Holy Night." He reached the bakery steps. Looked down. Another pair of tracks, small ones, led away into the alley. Before he could knock, the door opened. Evie blinked, surprised. She didn't smile. Didn't scowl either. "I was just," he started, voice rough from disuse. She waited. "I saw the bread," he said. She looked at the basket behind him. "Take it if you need." "I don't need." His voice turned sharp, unmeant. He swallowed. "I just hadn't seen anyone hang bread like that before." She tilted her head. "My sister used to. She said the Savior was born hungry." He shifted. "Wasn't trying to bother." "You're not." The silence stretched between them, soft and awkward. Then, would you like coffee? He blinked. No, he said, but not firmly. I mean, thank you. She nodded. Merry Christmas, Mr. Coulter. She closed the door gently. He stood there another minute, then turned back toward the shop. Snow had started again, fine as sifted flour. He passed the alley and saw the child again. She was crouched beside a stray dog, feeding it crusts. She saw him, smiled wide, and said, Mama said not to talk, but you look like you need a friend. He didn't know what to say. I'm Josie, she added. Do you got a tree? No. Do you want one? He paused. Don't have much use for one. Her nose wrinkled. Trees ain't for use. They're for feeling like magic. Her words hit him sideways. Run along now, he said, gentler than he'd meant. Okay. She stood. I like your beard. It's like a sad bear's. Then she was gone. He walked home slower. Inside the forge, the cold had crept in deeper. The hammer on the workbench looked heavier than before. His breath fogged in the air like ghosts. He lit a lamp and sat by the hearth, stared at the blackened coals. After a long moment, he reached for the tinder box, struck a flame, set the kindling softly. It hissed, then whispered into light. He sat back, listened to the small crackle. Outside, snow kept falling. He rose, went to a high shelf, and took down an old wooden box. Inside it, 2 iron tree ornaments shaped like stars. His wife had made them. Said they'd last longer than tinsel. He turned one in his hand. Then he stood, went outside, and hung it on the door handle. No tree, but something. In the morning, children would pass. Maybe they'd see it. Maybe she would. He stood there longer than he meant to. The stars above flickered cold and high. He almost went back inside when he noticed it. A tin wrapped in a dishcloth sitting on the porch rail. He hadn't heard a knock. He opened it. Still warm biscuits. Buttered. Light as air. No note. Just the quiet offering. He stared out into the snow, heart ticking louder than it should. A gesture. The kind that cracked something open, not loudly but enough. He stepped back inside, closed the door soft, and sat with the tin beside him. He didn't eat right away. Just held it. The lamp flickered low. The fire found strength. And Wade Coulter, whose name had been spoken only in whispers, sat in his cold forge beside a quiet fire, holding something warm. Something like memory. Something like mercy. And far off across the wind and the bells, a child's voice sang a carol off-key, but full. Like she believed. Like maybe, just maybe, she was right. The morning after Christmas came like a breath held too long, quiet, pale, and raw at the edges. The sky was the color of tin, dull and heavy, and the air held the hush that only comes after laughter has left a room. Wade Coulter stood in the doorway of the forge again, same as the day before, but something had shifted. A tin of biscuits sat empty on his table. He hadn't eaten them all. Just enough to remember taste. Just enough to believe someone had meant for him to. He shrugged on his coat and stepped out. The snow had crusted overnight. Beneath each step came the brittle sound of a world refusing to thaw. Smoke curled out of chimneys. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. No carols today, just the scrape of shovels and the wind's low hymn. He didn't mean to walk into town, but his boots took him there anyway. Past the livery, past the saloon's closed doors, past the church where the wreaths were beginning to wilt. There was nowhere he needed to be, and maybe that was the loneliest kind of truth. The bakery was open. Golden light spilled from the window like something spilled from heaven. Inside, Evie moved with slow grace, dusting sugar over bread, her apron smudged with flour. There was a kind of gentleness in the way she touched the dough, as if she still believed food could make people feel safe. Wade lingered by the doorway longer than he should have. He wasn't the only one watching. A cluster of women gathered at the edge of the porch next door, voices low, eyes sharper than frost. Still makes deliveries to him after what happened. Can't imagine what her sister would have thought. Girl don't know no better. Calls him Mr. Anvil Man, I heard. He turned away before they noticed he'd heard. But their words clung like coal dust, heavy and black. He stepped into the bakery without thinking. The bell above the door rang soft. Warmth wrapped around him like a coat he hadn't worn in years. Cinnamon, nutmeg, wood smoke, the faintest thread of rosemary. He breathed it in and remembered winter before grief. Evie turned, surprised. Not afraid. Morning, Mr. Coulter, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. He nodded, uneasy. Didn't mean to intrude. You didn't. He hesitated. Just thought I'd see if you had any bread left. She lifted a loaf wrapped in linen. Still warm. He fumbled for coin. Consider it part of the tin trade, she said. Josie told me you liked the biscuits. He flushed. Thank you. Their hands brushed when he took the bread. Her fingers were warm, sure. She didn't flinch. Before he could speak again, the back curtain fluttered and Josie appeared, arms full of sticks and twigs. Mr. Anvil Man, she cried, dropping them all. Wade blinked. You again. You never came to dinner. I didn't know I was invited. Mama set a place, she said plainly, as if that settled everything. Josie, Evie murmured, warning gentle. Josie grinned. It's okay. He looks better today. Not as grumpy. Wade chuckled, surprising himself. Evie shook her head, but not in disapproval. Where are all those sticks going? He asked. Making forest stew. He frowned. It's pretend, she explained. For the dog outside. He's sad. Wade glanced at the window. Sure enough, the same mutt from yesterday waited by the alley, his tail thumping slow in the snow. He stays there. Wade asked. Only when he's cold. Mama lets me feed him crusts. He got a name? Not yet. You want to name him? He wasn't sure how to answer. Nobody'd asked him to name anything in years. I'll think on it. Josie beamed. Okay, but something good. He's scared of ghosts. Wade looked at her. And you're not. She shook her head. Ghosts are just old love that don't know where to go. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Her words hit something he hadn't opened in a long while. Evie stepped forward. Josie, why don't you take the stew to the porch? The girl obeyed, humming softly as she went. Evie turned back. I'm sorry. She talks more than sense sometimes. No, Wade said. She sees more than most. Evie's eyes softened. Maybe. He looked at her fully then. Her face was worn but not tired. Her hands moved with purpose. She was a woman who kept going, not because it was easy, but because she refused to stop. He felt something pull inside him, slow, quiet, dangerous. I should go, he said. Thank you, for the bread. She nodded. Of course. He stepped out, holding the loaf like it might vanish. Josie was crouched beside the dog again, whispering to him like they shared secrets. Wade paused. You're brave. She looked up. Mama says being kind is the bravest thing. He walked away without replying. Halfway home he realized he was smiling. That night he tried to read an old book by lamplight, but the words didn't hold. He kept hearing her voice. Ghosts are just old love that don't know where to go. He sat by the fire long after the flames died, turning those words over and over like stones in his hand. The next morning he didn't light the forge. Instead he gathered his tools and walked back to town. The gate in front of the bakery had been leaning for weeks. He'd noticed it, but now it bothered him more than it should. Evie wasn't outside, but Josie was. Mr. Anvil Man, she shouted. Mama's in the kitchen. She said I can watch you if you work. He nodded at the gate. Might as well fix this if it's going to greet people. Josie sat on the step with a chunk of bread, feeding crumbs to the dog. You ever fix hearts? She asked suddenly. Not much call for it. She pointed to her chest. Mama's break sometimes. You can tell when her hands get real still. He didn't know what to say, so he kept working. Evie came out an hour later, wiping her brow. You didn't have to do that. He straightened. Didn't ask. She tilted her head. Still. Thank you. Something loose in the hinge. Wasn't hard. But they both knew it wasn't about the hinge. Come in, she said after a pause. For coffee. He followed. Inside the kitchen was warm. Steam rose from the stove. Josie took a seat near the hearth and began drawing pictures with a bit of charcoal. Evie poured coffee into a chipped mug. It's strong. I didn't know if... Perfect, he said. They sat in silence a while. Not awkward. Not quite familiar either. Why do you live alone? Josie asked from the floor. Josie, Evie warned. It's all right, Wade said. He sipped the coffee. I used to live with someone. She passed. I'm sorry. She had a laugh like wind chimes, he added. Even when she was angry. Did it hurt when she left? He didn't answer right away. Every day, he finally said. Josie nodded. That's love, Mama says. It hurts after. Evie placed a hand over her daughter's. Wade stood. I should go. You've got things to do. Come back tomorrow? Josie asked. He hesitated. Evie looked at him, eyes unreadable. He gave a slight nod. Maybe. Outside, the dog followed him halfway down the street. That evening, he polished the sign above the forge. It hadn't been touched in 2 years. Then he lit the hearth. Not to work. Just to let the heat breathe again. He found the second iron star his wife had made and set it on the windowsill. Let the town see. Let them talk. The next day he returned with a small horseshoe charm and gave it to Josie for the dog. Still no name? He asked. She looked at the dog, who sat now like he belonged. Ghost, she said. Wade blinked. For the love that doesn't leave. He knelt. Ghost it is. Evie smiled from the doorway. That night he left the forge open. Just a crack. In case someone needed something. And someone did. Near midnight, a knock. He opened the door. Josie, wrapped in a too big shawl, held out a paper. A drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a star. Him, her, and Evie. We saved you a seat again, she said. Dinner's tomorrow. He stared at the drawing. Then down at her. Then past her, to the bakery porch where Evie stood, one hand clutching the doorframe. Her eyes held something close to hope. He wanted to say yes, but the words wouldn't come. Instead he knelt. I'll think about it. Josie smiled. Thinking's the start of saying yes. He watched them walk away, her small hand in Evie's. The snow began to fall again, soft as a hush. He held the paper to his chest. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no. And in a town that still whispered his name like a warning, that was something. That was a beginning. Snow softened the sharp edges of town, making even the roughest doorways look like they'd been forgiven. Wade stepped outside just before dawn, the sky still the color of smoke. Frost covered everything, nails, windows, fences, like the earth had stopped breathing in its sleep. He stood still, letting the cold wake him slowly. The forge behind him was warm, faintly glowing. He'd stoked the fire just to see if he could. Just to remind himself that heat was still possible. In his hand was a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, a repaired hinge, 2 new nails, and a note he hadn't signed. He left it on the bakery porch, tucked beneath the steps where the wind wouldn't find it. Then he turned and walked away before the sun could catch him standing there. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't need it. The act was the answer. Later that morning he heard a knock. Not a loud one, just enough to let him know someone had stood on the other side of the door, long enough to gather nerve. When he opened it, no one remained. But a pie sat waiting on the step. He bent, lifted it. Peach and cinnamon. Still warm. No note. But he knew. He brought it inside. Set it gently on the table. Then didn't eat a bite. Not yet. Just let the scent fill the room. Kindness, he'd found, had its own silence. By midday he was walking through town again, slower now, as if his boots didn't need to fight the ground anymore. He passed by the church. A new sign hung above the doors. Even the lost are welcome. He scoffed, but softly. Inside the saloon voices rose, some rough, some lazy with drink. He didn't enter. Didn't need to. But as he passed he caught a name. Coulter's sniffin' around the baker now. Guess ghosts make good house guests. Laughter followed. Low, male, familiar. Wade paused. His jaw tightened. He kept walking. Outside the mercantile, Mrs. Callum stood in her green wool shawl, arms folded like a judge waiting on a sentence. Her eyes caught his. He nodded, courteous, and kept moving. You fixin' to become decent again, Mr. Coulter? She called. He stopped. Look back. She smiled, thin and bitter. Takes more than biscuits and patched gates to make a man righteous. He didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, but because she wouldn't hear anything he said unless it was apology, and even then she'd never grant pardon. He left her standing in her frozen little courtroom and returned to the forge. That night Josie came skipping up the path. Ghost, the dog, trailed behind her like a shadow more loyal than most kin. She didn't knock. Just opened the door and walked in like she'd been doing it for years. Mama made stew, she said. But she burned the bread. He chuckled. Did she? She said I could ask you for help tomorrow. But I can't wait that long. Bread matters. He raised an eyebrow. Bread matters? Mama says food is how people say what they can't. That made him pause. He bent to her level. And what's the stew trying to say? She tapped her chin dramatically. Maybe. I'm sorry I left you cold. He looked down at the pie still untouched on the table. Maybe. She sat by the fire, Ghost curling at her feet. He handed her a small cup of warm milk. She took it without asking why he had it ready. I fixed your mama's bench too, he said after a while. I know. She smiled for no reason after you left. That's how I know. They sat like that a while. Nothing loud. Just breath and warmth and the flicker of light. Then she stood. I gotta go. She'll worry. He walked her out, watched as she disappeared into the falling snow. The silence she left behind wasn't heavy anymore. Just still. The next day Evie came herself. She stood at his door, gloved hands clasped, lips pressed into something shy of a smile. "I hope you like the pie." "I did. I burnt the first one," she admitted. "Got distracted. Seems worth the effort." They stood like that, not speaking but not done either. "I have a favor," she said. His brow lifted. "Josie wants to learn how to make horseshoes." He blinked. "She's 6. She says she's strong." He smiled. "I can show her a thing or two." "Thank you. You trust me with her?" "I do." The way she said it held weight. Not blind. Not soft. But earned. That afternoon Josie arrived in a too-big apron, dragging a stool behind her. Wade showed her how to hold the tongs. How to strike true. She missed every swing, but her eyes lit up like lanterns. He corrected her grip, his hands over hers, slow and patient. She grinned. "Mama said you're gentle with broken things." He blinked. "I'm not broken," she added proudly. "But she said you'd still know how to hold me right." He didn't know what to say to that. By sunset, she'd made a mess of nails and a crooked hook she claimed was for Ghost's collar. Evie picked her up, thanked him, lingered. "I can pay you." "Don't?" She nodded. "All right." Their fingers brushed as he handed her the child's gloves. That night, he stood at the forge, staring at the piece of metal Josie had bent. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it stayed on the wall beside the hammer. Next day, the whispers grew louder. At the church, the Reverend spoke of temptation in sheep's clothing. He never named names, but eyes found Wade like arrows. Evie didn't sit in the front pew anymore. Mrs. Callum stopped by the bakery and loudly asked if Josie's real father was still living in sin across the street. Evie answered softly, "My daughter knows kindness when she sees it." Still the town stirred. That evening Wade found a rock thrown through his window. Inside the forge, nothing taken. Just broken glass and the stink of beer on the stone. He swept it up. Said nothing. Evie brought him new pains the next day. He looked at her. "You don't have to get caught in my trouble." She met his eyes. "Trouble has a habit of looking for the quiet ones. I stopped hiding from it when my sister died." She helped him set the glass, her hands steady. When they finished, she sat beside him, uninvited, unafraid. "You miss her?" he asked quietly. "Every night." "What would she say about all this?" "She'd tell me to bake extra." They laughed. A small one. But it stayed in the room even after it died. He looked down at his hands. "I wasn't a good man to my wife." Evie didn't flinch. "I drank too much. Worked too hard. Forgot birthdays. Then when she got sick, I didn't believe it was serious. Until it was." "Grief makes memory cruel," she said. "But you loved her." "I did. And now? I still don't know what to do with that love. Maybe it just needs a new place to rest." He looked at her. Saw the strength under the softness. "Is that what you've done?" "I'm trying." Outside, snow began again. Gentle, steady. She stood. "I brought soup." He took it with both hands. They didn't speak more. But when she left, he watched her walk away longer than usual. And this time he left the door open a while after she'd gone. That night, Ghost barked once and then fell silent. Wade rose from bed, pulled on boots and stepped out. On his porch sat a bundle. Inside, a child's drawing, him, Evie, Josie, and the dog. But this time, above their heads, were words scribbled in charcoal. "A family can start anywhere." He touched the page like it was glass. Then turned, because he wasn't alone. Across the street, Evie stood in her window, a candle glowing behind her. She didn't wave. Just looked at him like she knew every page of his story and didn't mind how torn they were. He lifted the drawing slightly, a gesture that said thank you without saying a word. She nodded. And turned away. The wind picked up then. But Wade didn't feel cold. Not anymore. The new year came without fanfare. No fireworks, no music, just the steady hush of falling snow and the creak of frost settling into wood beams. Wade woke early before light touched the windows, and lay still, listening to the soft crackle of embers from the forge hearth. The fire hadn't gone out during the night. That alone felt like a kind of victory. By mid-morning, the town had begun to stir again. Smoke lifted from chimneys and boot tracks cut new lines through the street. At the bakery, the shutters had been pulled open, and the scent of warm bread drifted across the cold like a whispered memory. Wade hesitated before heading that way, more cautious now, more exposed. Josie met him on the step before he could knock. "You missed breakfast," she said. "I figured. Next time you don't show up, we're sending Ghost to drag you." Wade raised an eyebrow. That mutt wouldn't last 5 minutes in the cold. He's got fight. So do you, he murmured. She beamed, then tugged the door open. Mama saved you coffee. Evie looked up from the counter, her sleeves dusted with flour and her hair tied back in a loose braid. She offered a quiet smile and he stepped inside. It was the first time he'd entered without needing a reason. They sat around the small kitchen table. No talk of the weather. No talk of what the town was saying. Just coffee and bread, and the warmth of three people not pretending to be anything but present. Later, Wade helped mend a drawer that had been sticking. Then he rehung the pantry door. Little things. Easy work. But his hands moved with purpose and Evie didn't stop him. I saw Mrs. Callum today, Josie said suddenly, swinging her legs. Evie stiffened. What did she say? Josie shrugged. She told me I was too bold for a girl. I told her I was raised by bakers, not barn cats. Wade stifled a laugh. Evie flushed. Josie. It's true. She's not wrong, Wade added gently. Bold's not bad. But it bothers folks, Evie said, her voice softer now. Especially when they've made up their minds about who you should be. Josie frowned. She said we're being watched. We are, Evie said. And that doesn't scare you? It used to. Wade met her eyes. And now? I'd rather be talked about than forgotten. Outside, the bell above the bakery door rang. The church ladies entered, 3 of them, all scarves and long coats, lips pursed like lemon slices. Wade slipped into the kitchen while Evie greeted them. He listened to their voices, low and pointed, like they were measuring kindness in teaspoons. Heard you've had company? Folks talk, you know. Josie's too young to understand. Evie stayed calm, polite, firm. When they left, she returned with her jaw set and her hands trembling just enough for Wade to notice. I shouldn't have let them in, she said, mostly to herself. You don't owe them a thing. They'll tell the Reverend. They'll tell everyone. Let them. She looked at him. It's not just me. It's Josie. She's the one who'll pay. He stood, unsure, then reached into his coat and pulled out something small. A charm, a braided bit of leather with an iron coin threaded through it. I made this for her, he said. For luck. Or strength. Evie took it, her fingers brushing his. She'll like that. Give it to her when it's quiet. He turned to leave but paused at the door. You're not alone, Evie? She didn't answer. But he saw the way her shoulders straightened after he left. That night he walked to the church. The doors were closed, the lanterns low. Inside, Reverend Holbrook stood behind the pulpit, reading aloud to an empty room. Wade knocked. The Reverend looked up, startled, then nodded slowly. Mr. Coulter. I came to listen, Wade said. To the word. To the tone. The Reverend closed the Bible. You've not been here since the funeral. Figured God already knew how I felt. And now? Now I'm wondering if grace has an expiration date. The Reverend studied him. People remember pain, Mr. Coulter. They cling to it. But they also remember courage. If it's quiet enough. Wade stepped forward. I've been doing things, small things, to earn back my name. That's not how redemption works. Then how does it? It starts with showing up. Even when they talk. Especially when they talk. Wade nodded once and turned to go. The Reverend's voice followed him. She's a good woman. And the girl's better for knowing you. He paused but didn't look back. I'm not sure what that makes me. Capable, the Reverend said. Wade walked out into the night, the snow falling heavy now, blanketing every sound but his own breath. The next morning the town felt colder, not in temperature but in manner. Doors shut faster. Conversations ended when he approached. A boy spit in the snow near his boots and walked off without meeting his eyes. He kept walking. At the bakery, Josie met him with a grin. I gave Ghost the charm. He keeps it in his mouth like treasure. Evie laughed from the kitchen. But her eyes were tired. I can fix the fence out back today, Wade offered. Don't, she said gently. Not today. He understood. They sat by the hearth not saying much. Josie colored quietly. Ghost snored. The room felt smaller than usual, like the town had pressed in around it. After lunch, Josie slipped outside to play. Wade turned to Evie. They're getting louder. They'll always be loud. You think I should go? She met his gaze. Do you want to? No. Then don't. But you. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to stay if that's what you want. He looked down. I want to. She reached across the table, her hand resting over his. Neither of them moved. Until the knock. 3 sharp raps. Evie tensed. Wade stood. At the door, Mrs. Callum. Behind her, the preacher. Wade stepped aside. Let them in. Miss Barnes, the Reverend said. There's concern. Evie stood. About what? Mrs. Callum sniffed. You and this man. The child involved. The appearances. Evie crossed her arms. And? The town's talking, the Reverend said. There's a meeting next week to discuss community values. Wade stepped forward. You mean judgment? We mean preservation, Mrs. Callum snapped. Wade looked at the preacher. Do you think I'm a danger? The Reverend hesitated. I think you're trying. But trying doesn't always win folks over. I'm not here to win them. Then why are you here? Evie answered. Because we want him here. Mrs. Callum's eyes narrowed. Then you'll both live with what comes. They left in silence. Evie sank into the chair. Wade knelt beside her. I'll leave if it'll make it easier. She shook her head. They're just loud. But they're not right. He hesitated. You sure? She nodded. I'm tired of being afraid of people who don't know us. Outside the snow had stopped. The street gleamed under the sun, but the cold hadn't lifted. That evening Wade lit a second lantern in the forge. Let it burn bright. Then he hung a new sign on the bakery fence. Not flashy. Just carved into wood. Warm bread. Warm hearts. All are welcome. He didn't ask. She didn't stop him. At dusk, Josie dragged a stool to the window. Ghost says the town can howl all it wants. He's not leaving. Wade chuckled. Neither am I. Evie met his gaze. Then we stand. That night, someone left ashes on the bakery step. A warning. Wade cleaned it up before Josie saw. But Evie saw. She didn't cry. Didn't speak. She just took his hand as they stood in the doorway. And when he looked down, he realized. Her hand wasn't trembling anymore. The wind came howling down from the canyon just past midnight, shaking loose a shutter on the bakery and moaning against the forge like a sorrow too old to name. Wade was already awake, boots on, fire stoked, a pot of water warming over the coals. He hadn't slept. Not since the ashes. They hadn't spoken about it, not really. Evie had swept the steps, Josie had giggled at a robin hopping along the rail, and Wade had hammered out a horseshoe like it was any other morning. But something had changed. Not in the way they looked at each other, but in the way they stood beside one another. He poured the hot water into a basin and scrubbed the soot from his hands. He was done hiding. At dawn, he crossed the road before the sun had touched the rooftops. Snow crunched beneath his boots, brittle and loud. Ghost followed silently. Josie opened the door before he knocked. Her eyes were wide. No smile this time. She's sick, the girl said. Mama's real hot. He moved past her into the narrow hallway that led to the back room. The warmth from the oven hadn't reached that far. The fire in the hearth was nearly out. And there, bundled in every quilt Josie could find, Evie lay pale, her brow gleaming with sweat, her breath shallow and quick. He knelt beside her. Her lips moved, but the words didn't make sense. She was coughing last night, Josie whispered. Then she couldn't stop shaking. Wade felt her forehead. Boiling. He turned to the girl. Get my coat. Where are you taking her? To the church. There's warmth there. And people. They hate us. They don't get to any more. He wrapped Evie in her thickest blanket, tucked her hair gently beneath the edge and lifted her into his arms. She weighed nothing. Lighter than grief. Lighter than guilt. Outside, the town was just beginning to wake. The bakery door slammed open as he stepped into the street. Frost bit his eyes, but he didn't stop. Ghost barked once and trotted ahead. Mrs. Callum stood at her stoop, arms full of firewood. Her mouth opened. No words came. By the time he reached the church, the bell hadn't rung yet. But the doors were unlocked. He kicked them open with his heel. Reverend Holbrook looked up from prayer, startled. Behind him, the sanctuary still smelled of pine and melted wax. She's burning up, Wade said. And the doctor won't come. Holbrook crossed the room in 3 strides and took her pulse. His eyes narrowed. Lay her here. Wade placed her on the pew's cushions, cradling her head until it rested. Josie climbed onto the bench beside her and held her hand. Get water, the Reverend said. And cloth. Wade didn't move. I said go, Holbrook snapped. Wade looked at him, not with anger, but something deeper. I'm not leaving her again. Holbrook faltered. Then nodded. Other townsfolk began to trickle in. First the organist. Then 2 women with hymnals. Then Mrs. Callum herself, trailing snow and silence. They all stopped when they saw the blacksmith bent over the baker's fevered face. No one spoke. No one needed to. The church warmed slowly, one breath at a time. Someone brought tea. Someone else brought broth. Mrs. Callum, of all people, knelt to relight the fire. Josie clung to Wade's arm, and he kept whispering things Evie couldn't hear. You told me to stay. You told me not to run. I'm here. Hours passed. Candles burned low. The sky turned gray again. Evie moaned once, then fell quiet. Wade's hands trembled. Holbrook placed a hand on his shoulder. She's fighting. She's tired. So are you. But here you are. Josie had fallen asleep curled beneath her mother's arm. Wade closed his eyes. He remembered other fires. Other bets. His wife's cold fingers slipping from his grasp as he begged her not to go. The way the town had looked at him after. The way he had looked at himself. He opened his eyes to find Evie watching him. Not fully awake. But not gone. He bent close. I'm not leaving. She tried to speak, but he hushed her. His hand brushed her cheek and her eyes fluttered, softening. I'm right here. Holbrook stepped forward, nodding once. She needs rest. Wade stayed beside her all night. By morning the fever had broken. The news spread faster than gossip ever had. By afternoon townsfolk came by the forge one by one. Not to talk. Just to place something at the door. Firewood. A pie. Flour. A pair of mittens too small for Wade but just right for Josie. Mrs. Callum arrived last. She said nothing. Just placed a jar of preserved peaches on the step. And left. When Evie returned home, pale but upright, she paused at the sight of her porch. It had been swept. The railings fixed. A new blanket hung over the swing. Wade stood beside her, Josie perched on his shoulder. You've got neighbors now, he said. I suppose I do. That evening the three of them ate by lamplight. Not much talk. Just the clink of spoons, the sigh of old floorboards, the quiet hum of something sacred taking root. Josie fell asleep in her chair. Wade rose to carry her to bed, but Evie stopped him. She can sleep here. He lowered her gently to the rug by the fire. Tucked a quilt around her. When he turned back, Evie was watching him. I was scared, she said. Me too. But not now. No. He stepped closer. Not too close. Her voice softened. You stayed. I told you I would. She looked down. They'll still talk. Let them. Outside, the snow began to fall again. This time it didn't feel like judgment. Just a cover. A quieting. Wade stepped to the door. Opened it. Let the cold wind brush his face. I never said goodbye to her, he said. Not properly. Evie moved beside him. You don't have to forget her. I know. But maybe I can stop kneeling at a grave and start kneeling at a table. She reached for his hand. Took it gently. You already have. The wind settled. The lamp inside flickered. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man waiting to be forgiven. He felt chosen. Not loudly. Not all at once. But enough. He closed the door behind them. And for once it stayed open just a little longer.